What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
The first item of business is general questions. In order to get in as many people as possible, I'd appreciate short and succinct questions and answers to match. And at question number 1, I call Katy Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met with COSLA and Police Scotland to discuss safe access for all women to clinics and hospitals.
Minister Marie Todd.
The Scottish Government convened a working group in December 2021 with members from COSLA, Police Scotland and councils and health boards that are affected by vigils and protests that take place outside abortion clinics. The group is specifically focused on seeking solutions to ensure that women can access abortion services safely without fear of harassment. The working group last met this morning. That was our third meeting. The agenda and minutes from previous meetings can be found on the Scottish Government's website.
Katy Clark.
Thank you. Last week, at the end of 40 days of continuous demonstrations, there were 100 anti-abortion protesters outside the Queen Elizabeth Hospital maternity unit. Does the Minister accept that women and the workforce are being harassed and that urgent action is needed to bring this type of behaviour to an end?
Minister.
Does she accept that we need to know that action is being taken urgently and that steps will be taken to ensure that these kind of protests cannot continue? And will the Scottish Government have the courage to bring forward Scotland-wide legislation to create buffer zones?
Minister.
So let me put on record I was very dismayed to hear about the protests at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital last weekend. There is absolutely no place in our society for the harassment, abuse or intimidation of women and girls who are accessing healthcare services. The Scottish Government is committed to women being able to access timely abortion without facing judgment. Both our programme for government and our Women's Health Plan included undertakings in this regard, which I hope indicates the importance which we place on this issue. I'm working closely and collaboratively and constructively with Gillian Mackay, who has intentions to lodge a Members' Bill on this issue, and I met her in February. She was again at this meeting this morning of the working group to meet all of the working group members to share her consultation, and we all agreed to work constructively with her on this issue.
Question number 2, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the rollout of the Home Heating Support Fund.
Minister Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. The Home Heating Support Fund is delivered on our behalf by Advice Direct Scotland. It reopened at the end of last year with funding provided from our Fuel Insecurity Fund. Since then, it's been successfully helping households at risk of severely rationing their energy use or of self-disconnecting entirely. And while figures are still being collated, the provisional figures show that over 7,300 applications for support have been received by the 11th of April. It will continue to offer household support through the current financial year, thanks to the additional £10 million of funding that we recently announced for the Fuel Insecurity Fund.
Evelyn Tweed.
I thank the Minister for that answer. As the Tories waste precious energy running to the defence of their law-breaking Prime Minister and Chancellor, people across Scotland are focused on how to make ends meet, feed their children and keep their homes warm. Does the Minister agree with me that instead of navel-gazing, the Tories must engage with reality and encourage the Chancellor to cut VAT on energy bills as a way of helping people with the cost of living crisis?
Minister.
Well, I very strongly agree that action must be taken and that a short-term cut on VAT on energy fuels, amongst a range of other measures, would be one way of providing short-term relief for households faced with the huge increase in the price cap that's just come into effect and which we expect to get worse later this year. We first suggested such a cut in VAT back in January, and my colleagues, Finance Secretary and the CABSEC for Net Zero, both reiterated that request when they wrote to their UK Government counterparts last month. And we have put forward a range of other actions to address the cost of living crisis, some of which sit with the UK Government and some of which, as we discussed, we've already implemented with devolved powers here. We have been pressing for some time for an ending of VAT on energy saving measures, which would increase the uptake of these products, and it's good that the UK Government have finally recognised the merit of this particular measure. We are also continuing to urge them to commit to rebalancing the policy cost element of the energy bills to reduce the premium paid by households reliant on electric heating and to unlock the deployment of low and zero emissions heating. Finally, Presiding Officer, it is astonishing that they published an energy security strategy which says absolutely nothing about energy efficiency, and I'm pleased to say that this Government continues to place a very high priority on that long-term priority.
Question number 3, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government what help it will provide to tackle any NHS backlogs in rural areas.
Cabinet Secretary Humza Yousaf.
The ongoing impact of addressing the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that many health services have been suspended or reduced in scope and scale. This has, of course, affected almost all aspects of planned care, and as a result, of course, many people are waiting longer for the care they need. I hope the member and the Chamber can be assured that addressing this backlog will continue to meet the ongoing urgent healthcare demands is our top priority. We, of course, published the NHS Recovery Plan. It sets out our plans to address the backlog of care throughout the course of the parliamentary term. In Dumfries and Galloway specifically, we're working closely with the board on their local recovery plan, which recognises their specific challenges. This includes recruitment across a number of key roles to support increased capacity, the use of the independent sector where appropriate, and funding to open short-stay and ward beds to accommodate additional activity.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. The Scottish Government earlier this month announced that it had purchased a private healthcare hospital, the Carrick Glen and Ayr, that specialises in orthopaedics. But given the important role that's played by cottage hospitals at Castle Douglas, Kirkcudbright and Newton Stewart, who before the pandemic provided vital health services to nearly 600 patients, can I ask the Health Secretary whether financial assistance will be made available to either retain or replace these crucial local facilities in order to reduce the growing backlog and delayed discharge and move palliative care patients closer to home?
Cabinet Secretary.
Carson, this is a very important point indeed, and what I will say to him is, of course, it is for local health boards to make decisions and assessments about the various premises and acute sites that they have within their health board region. If they come forward to the Government with a plan on how, for example, the purchase of these premises might help them reduce the backlog, then of course the Government will look at that favourably.
Stephanie Callaghan.
Presiding Officer, the recruitment of new staff to the health service will play a crucial role in supporting the recovery of our NHS.
Can I therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary to provide an update on the progress made since the launch of the recruitment drive in October, and can the Cabinet Secretary outline how measures and national workforce strategy will promote the growth of Scotland's remote and rural workforce in the long term?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm delighted that we were able to announce earlier this week that we've recruited over 1,000 healthcare support staff, and they are in a mixture of both acute sites and community, and of course they're also in both urban areas and indeed remote and island communities, which is very positive indeed. We also recruited almost 200 overseas registered nurses, with another 200 or over 200 actually coming on stream in the next weeks and months ahead. And I should say that overseas recruitment is ethical international recruitment, which is of course incredibly important too. We are absolutely committed to developing a sustainable healthcare workforce, and of course we will develop a remote and rural workforce strategy, which we have committed to as well. We are creating, as the member is no doubt aware of, a national centre for remote and rural health and social care. That is due to be operational by spring next year, and that centre itself will support recruitment, retention, ideal practice and evaluation training, education and research.
Question number 4, Collette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met with the Department for Work and Pensions and what was discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
Ministers and officials are in regular contact with the Department for Work and Pensions. Joint ministerial working group meetings are held twice a year, the most recent one taking place in November last year, when adult disability payment, child disability payment and Scottish child payment were discussed. The Minister for Social Security and Local Government holds regular bilateral meetings with Chloe Smith, the UK Government Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work, on priorities for the delivery of devolved social security, the most recent of which took place last month, and is also a well-established programme of meetings at official level on the delivery of devolved welfare benefits.
Collette Stevenson.
As the Cabinet Secretary knows, the Tory cost of living crisis is causing real hardship, and their lack of action is staggering. Does she agree with me that the UK Tory Government must review and increase the local housing allowance to help people with spiralling costs, raise all social security payments by at least 6% to protect people from poverty, and implement fair and fast compensation, as requested by the WASPI women, to ensure 1950s women aren't further penalised?
Cabinet Secretary.
First of all, the Scottish Government have fully supported the work of the WASPI campaign and have consistently called on the UK Government to take responsibility for the hardship caused to thousands of women negatively impacted. On local housing allowance rates were last set on the 31st of March 2020 and have not been elevated since. I wrote to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions on the 21st of January this year, urging her to take steps to restore them to a level that will prevent many people in Scotland having to make difficult choices between paying their rent or feeding their families and heating their home. In contrast, we did act urgently, in spite of our limited powers, by further increasing several forms of devolved social security benefits and assistance from 3.1% to 6%.
Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you. The DWP's nationwide closures include their office in Aberdeen, which leaves over 60 workers at risk of redundancy. I previously raised the prospect of these highly skilled workers being redeployed to Social Security Scotland in order to assist the rollout of new devolved benefits. The Minister at the time indicated that the Scottish Government could explore this option, but no clear commitment was given. So I asked the Minister today for a firm commitment. Will the Scottish Government work with the PCS Trade Union and the DWP to explore redeployment of these workers to Social Security Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'll certainly pick that up and write to the member with more detail, but she will probably be aware that a number of DWP staff have been successful in moving across to Social Security Scotland over the course of Social Security Scotland being up and running, and a number of staff have moved across, obviously on a recruitment basis. But I'm happy to take forward the suggestion that she's made and look at what was said previously, and I'll write to her with more detail.
Question number 5, Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to proceed with its commitment to mitigate any impact of the UK Government benefit cap as much as possible within the scope of its devolved powers.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
We know that households impacted by the benefit cap lose almost £2,500 per year. Mitigation of the cap will help the families hardest hit by the UK Government's cuts in order to help them keep their home. We'll be investing up to £10 million in 2022-23 to mitigate the benefit cap as far as we can within our powers, and we're working with local authorities to identify existing good practice in benefit cap mitigation and to agree how best to support those affected by this damaging policy. And this additional funding will be rolled out as early as possible this year.
Marie McNair.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the first conversation I had with her as a newly elected MSP was about mitigating the benefit cap, and I'm delighted we're doing this. It is beyond belief that the Westminster Government are implementing a policy that denies families with children basic levels of subsistence and continues to make things even worse with a two-child policy and its abhorrent rape clause. Will the Cabinet Secretary join me in condemning this approach and agree that it has no part in an independent Scotland, that its dignity, fairness and respect are at the heart of its approach to social security policy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I wholeheartedly agree with Marie McNair on that point? And can I also recognise her long-standing support of the move to mitigate the benefit cap? And indeed, she did raise it just in the early days of her being elected. We have repeatedly called on the UK Government to urgently review the various failings of the universal credit system, such as the two-child limit and the rape clause, which is obviously abhorrent and would have no place in an independent Scotland social security system. In contrast, we are committing over £3.9 billion for benefit expenditure in 2022-23, providing support to over 1 million people, and this is over £360 million above the level of funding to be received from the UK Government through the block grant adjustment, showing the investment that we are making in the people of Scotland in this important area.
Question number 6, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is progressing with the replacement of unsafe cladding on tall buildings.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
So we will introduce legislation tomorrow to ban the highest risk cladding and combustible materials in residential and other high-risk buildings above 11 metres, and that will apply from the 1st of June of this year. All unsafe cladding being replaced in our assessment and remediation programme will need to meet that standard. And our programme of single building assessments, which of course is free to homeowners, is currently underway in 25 buildings, and this will determine what, if anything, needs to be done to ensure these buildings are safe. And I expect some of these assessments, which are detailed and very complex, to be completed in the coming weeks.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. In January, the UK Government pressurised housing developers to commit to removing dangerous cladding from buildings. 3 months later, we have seen no such moves from the Scottish Government. Therefore, can I ask what steps the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that developers remove flammable cladding from buildings as a matter of urgency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm really glad that Alexander Stewart has asked me this question. Can I first of all say to him, unfortunately, the Building Safety Pledge and Building Fund is for England only. Despite assurances that we would work closely together to tackle building safety issues, devolved administrations have yet to have a seat at the table. We have raised deep concerns with the Welsh Government about this. The change from a fund to now pledge letters means less consequentials are available for the devolved nations to tackle their own cladding issues. Now, we remain open to all solutions and are currently working with several developers to try and action remediation and to get that done on a voluntary basis, but it is deeply unhelpful that the UK Government have excluded Wales and Scotland from the Developers Fund, and we are urgently seeking a meeting with Michael Gove to request that the pledge letters cover Wales and Scotland. It is deeply disappointing that to date we have not managed to get that meeting arranged. And if my colleagues on the left who are heckling from a sedentary position would perhaps refocus their attention on requesting Michael Gove to meet with Wales and Scotland, because at the heart of this is a really important issue of unsafe cladding on buildings, and that is something surely that should transcend party politics. So if they can be of assistance, that would be most helpful.
Question number 7, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it's supporting the agricultural and fishing industries with rising fuel costs.
Cabinet Secretary Mary Goujon.
It's clear to all of us that Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the justified Western sanctions in response has impacts, and not least the hugely challenging increases in energy bills which affect households and everyone in the food industry, from farmers and processors to the fishing industry. Now, I'm acutely aware of the impact that this has across the food supply chain and the particular issues for our fishing industries facing financial hardship as a result. And the continued lack of engagement from the UK Government will lead again to consternation for Scottish businesses who are dealing with an already unsettled international environment. On the 17th of March, I announced that we've convened a food security and supply task force jointly with industry to monitor, identify and respond to these issues, as well as recommend actions that can be taken by business, the Scottish and UK governments, to mitigate against some of these challenges. And further to that, I'd also written on the 4th of April to the Minister, George Eustace, requesting an urgent four-nation summit on the impact of fuel prices. And yesterday, the Secretary of State finally agreed to this request during a meeting, and will now work with DEFRA to ensure this happens at pace.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary? While we're all feeling the pinch at the pumps, the exceptional rise in input costs is forcing boats in Orkney either to tie up or to leave the industry entirely. The combination of feed, fuel and fertiliser costs threatens the very viability of many farms. Given the importance of food security, as the Cabinet Secretary recognised, when would she expect the working group to come forward with recommendations, and will she give a commitment to implement those recommendations with absolute urgency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, the task force was set up as a short-life task force exactly to do that, to look at the short, medium and longer-term actions. We had our third meeting yesterday. We will also be having our what's expected to be our last meeting shortly, and we will produce a paper with a report with recommendations from that, which of course the Scottish Government will consider carefully.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. And before we move on to First Minister's questions, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery the Honourable Jonathan O'Dea MP, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, Parliament of New South Wales. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I begin by wishing Her Majesty the Queen a very happy 96th birthday. On behalf of the whole Chamber and people across Scotland, we send our best wishes to the monarch who has been a constant in our country for many decades. Through good times and difficult periods, while the country has been at war and during peacetime, a global figure and our remarkable head of state. And I know everyone in this chamber will join us in wishing Her Majesty a very happy birthday. Can I ask the First Minister if she supports plans for drivers who live outside Edinburgh and Glasgow to be charged extra to get into Scotland's two largest cities?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, can I also take the opportunity to wish Her Majesty a very happy 96th birthday today. Her service has been, continues to be, an inspiration to many, not just in Scotland and the UK, but across the world. And I know all of us, in sending her our very best wishes today, will also wish her many happy returns. I think it is right that we support those who require to use our roads and that we do that in a range of ways, for example ensuring the good maintenance of our roads, pressing for action on the part of the UK Government to cut the cost of motoring, particularly just now when people are suffering from cost of living. But of course we also, all of us, have a big responsibility to ensure that we make the transition to net zero, and that means decarbonising our transport system. So local authorities will consult on a range of issues, and it's important that those responsibilities are kept in our minds, but also the views of the wider public are taken fully into account.
Douglas Ross.
So the First Minister wants to support those who use our roads, and her answer, tax them more. Because the SNP government brought in the workplace parking tax, and the SNP group in Edinburgh has charged ahead with plans to introduce it. Plans that would hit anyone who needs their car to get into work in the city. And now in their manifesto for the local election, the SNP have included proposals to charge vehicles just to come in to the capital. It's a commuter tax on people all over the country who travel to work in Edinburgh, who come to do business, to visit family and friends, or to use vital services. Scottish Conservatives are completely opposed to this proposal. So why are the SNP intent on making driving in our cities unaffordable?
First Minister.
I think perhaps on many issues Douglas Ross needs to decide what his position actually is and avoid rendering himself ridiculous by having contradictory and inconsistent positions. Talking of manifestos, let me first of all quote the Tory local government manifesto from 2017, which says this: "We need to empower councils and give them a renewed sense of meaning and purpose." And I can hear Douglas Ross say that's not up to date enough. So let me quote the Conservative manifesto from the Scottish Parliament election just this time last year. And again, I am quoting: "Councils should lead post-COVID reviews of changed travel patterns in their areas and be encouraged to create more low-traffic neighbourhoods." So on the one hand, Douglas Ross wants to empower local councils, and then he stands up there and says that I should rule out the ability of local councils deciding on things that could help us with that transition to net zero, while of course supporting travel patterns across the country. Not for the first time, Presiding Officer, and I suspect not for the last time. Douglas Ross's position is completely inconsistent and bordering on being ridiculous.
Bordering on ridiculous is that dismal answer. Well, two things then bordering on ridiculous are the fact that SNP backbenchers think that was a good answer, but also the complete deflection from the proposals from the SNP. Nothing from the leader of the SNP or from the First Minister about the specific question I asked, and her pre-prepared answers of what I might or might not have said don't really sit well. Colleagues, thank you. Listen. Her pre-prepared answers on what I may or may not have come to this chamber to say. I don't know what's difficult for the SNP to understand. The First Minister.
Excuse me, Mr. Ross. Can we please hear Mr. Ross? Thank you.
The First Minister is trying to predict what I would say at First Minister's questions, has a script ready to answer that had nothing to do with the issue that we are raising. It's about SNP raising the cost of driving cars in cities that people rely on to get to work, to visit friends and family, to use vital services. And in response to the news of this commuter tax, the Federation of Small Businesses this morning urged councils to avoid additional cost for business. They make it clear that a commuter tax would hit tradespeople coming from the Lothians, the Borders, Fife and further afield. And it's not just those areas that will be hit with extra charges from SNP councillors. Anyone working in Glasgow also faces the prospect of extra charges for driving into their city. Glasgow SNP leader Susan Aitken has suggested capping traffic on the M8. She's also considering introducing toll roads. First Minister, a previous SNP government scrapped those charges. Will you stand up and give a categorical answer that you will not bring them back in again?
First Minister.
I think Douglas Ross might want to reflect on the fact that the Chamber wasn't laughing with him a few moments ago, because I was quoting from Conservative manifestos that actually put their finger on the really important issue here. I think everybody across the country, and certainly everybody in this chamber, knows that all of us, not just in Scotland but across the world, face some really difficult, tough, challenging decisions in the years to come about how we heat our homes and also how we travel around the country so that we can meet so that we can meet our climate change obligations, make that transition to net zero, but have a transport system that still supports our economy and supports the travelling public. So it's easy for the Scottish Conservatives to reduce these challenging decisions in the simplistic way that they have, but the rest of us know that these decisions have to be faced. And this is about empowering local councils to consult on these decisions, to consider the options and to arrive at decisions. And that is what we are doing. It is what the Conservatives used to support, but clearly now don't. But we, as a government, continue to support the transport system across the country. Since this government took office, we have invested in excess of £9.5 billion in managing, maintaining, improving Scotland's trunk roads and our motorway network. We're also investing over £500 million for bus priority measures to support people out of cars. So we will continue to take the tough decisions, we will continue to consult the public and come to sensible decisions and back those decisions with investments. That's serious government as opposed to ridiculous opposition.
Douglas Ross. 3 questions so far to the First Minister and 0 answers. It was a very straightforward question. Would the First Minister rule out road tolls being reintroduced in Scotland? And she was silent, didn't even attempt to answer that question. But of course, across the chamber, all parties agree on the need to do more to meet our climate change targets. But, well, SNP members laugh about this, but in many industries and across rural areas especially, people still need their cars. And right now, there couldn't be a worse time to further hike the cost of driving. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Petrol prices are rising globally. Yet Nicola Sturgeon wants to tax people off the road by hammering anyone who owns a car. And the people who will be hit hardest are not the wealthiest, but ordinary working people who need their cars and who are already struggling with the cost of living. If the First Minister carries on down this road, Nicola Sturgeon and her SNP candidates are going to force Scotland's economy into the slow lane. The commuter tax should be abandoned. Toll charges should be ruled out, First Minister, and her workplace parking tax should be ditched. First Minister, will you drop this triple whammy of anti-driver taxes?
First Minister, I don't support road tolls, but I do support local councils being empowered to consider the tough issues that they face, to consult with the public and to take sensible decisions.
Excuse me, First Minister. First Minister, we will hear the First Minister. Thank you.
And I'll say 2 further things. Yes, people do continue to need their cars, particularly in rural and remote parts of our country, which is why this government has invested so heavily in maintaining and improving our trunk road and our motorway network. We've delivered improvements right across the country to meet the needs of all of the population, including the Queensferry crossing, the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, the M8, M73, M74, motorway improvements, and we will continue to do so. But the final point I would make, Presiding Officer, which I know is one that Douglas Ross will not want to face up to, what is hammering people, including motorists right now across the country, is the Tory-created cost of living crisis, which an out-of-touch Prime Minister and an out-of-touch Chancellor of the Exchequer refused to do enough about. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate problems being faced by people and the solutions that need to come from Douglas Ross's colleagues at Westminster.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
President, can I join others in wishing Her Majesty the Queen a very happy 96th birthday, and on this, her Platinum Jubilee year, thank her again for her service. Presiding Officer, before Easter, I highlighted the £2 million that the Government wasted on a turnaround manager at Ferguson's who left the yard in a worse state than he found it. The First Minister supported paying him nearly £3,000 a day while Scots faced a cost of living crisis. But this is not the only waste of public money that the First Minister has supported. So can the First Minister tell the Chamber how much money her government has wasted since 2007 because of delays, loan write-offs or avoidable spending?
First Minister.
I don't have that figure to hand. I'm happy to look at that. I suspect the way Anna Sarwar is characterising that may not be entirely one that I would agree with, but I'm more than happy to look at his question and the detail of that and write to him with the information in due course.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the answer is over £3 billion. That is the cost of SNP failure, the loss of public money due to SNP incompetence. And the list is endless. £152 million on a failed Katy contract at Ferguson's, £146 million fixing the government's mistakes at the Edinburgh Sick Kids and the Queen Elizabeth in Glasgow, £40 million and rising on the malicious prosecution of Rangers, almost £200 million on failed industrial interventions and loan write-offs, nearly £1 billion for agency workers in the health service because Nicola Sturgeon cut training places when Health Secretary, over £1 billion on delayed discharge because of their failure to fix the social care crisis, £3 billion. That is the equivalent of £1,200 bill for every household in Scotland. Every penny of this wasted money could mean more cash for the NHS, more cash for our schools, or more cash to tackle the cost of living crisis. Rather than helping people with the cost of living crisis, why is this government instead making them pay the cost of SNP failure?
First Minister.
Well, I did say that I suspected Anna Sarwar's characterisation of this would be an utter mischaracterisation. It turns out I was absolutely right on that. Let me, before I come on to some of the details, some of the ridiculous, I didn't think the opposition would be exceeded in terms of being ridiculous in their questioning today. But I'll come on to that in a second. But what Anna Sarwar failed, of course, to mention is that this government has had 15 years of unqualified accounts. Yeah. That is the reality in terms of our stewardship of the public finances. But let me give them two.
They don't understand it.
Obviously, they don't understand that point. It's a rather important point. But let me come on. Let me come on to the detail. So two of the examples. One of the examples, he's talking about prosecution. Prosecution decisions, of course, being matters for the independent Crown Office. And yet he is Anna Sarwar seriously saying that I, as First Minister, or any Minister of this government, should have interfered in the independent prosecution decisions of the Crown Office? Perhaps he should clarify that matter. And then the second example I will use, where he is downright wrong, is his £146 million of additional costs in relation to hospitals. So the vast majority of that figure, and I've looked at that closely because I've heard Labour use it, relates to planned costs which were in no way new, unexpected or avoidable. So, for example, 80 million of that related to preparatory works which were separate to the main contract but were budgeted costs included in the business case. Another £33 million related to the annual service payment, also part of the original business case. So there's a lot of nonsense in the question that Anna Sarwar has just asked there, and perhaps he should reflect on that.
Anna
Sarwar. Asking about wasted money, that's a waste of an answer from the First Minister right there. £40 million in a malicious prosecution, the first time ever in Scottish history. Perhaps the government should reflect on that. A hospital built for Edinburgh Sick Kids that failed to open. Perhaps the government should reflect on that. The failures in the Glasgow Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Perhaps the government should reflect on that. Because right around the country we are seeing the cost of SNP failure. And at the same time, energy bills are up, petrol prices are up, and the weekly shop is more expensive than ever. Right now in Scotland, there are mums skipping meals in order to feed their kids. People are knocking back items at food banks because they can't afford to cook them. And in the face of the biggest drop in living standards since the Second World War, both our governments are not doing enough. Instead of wasting billions of pounds paying the cost of SNP failure, we should be supporting families with the cost of living crisis. The £111 million of loan write-offs could have been used to top up the Scottish Welfare Fund. The £152 million misspent mismanaging Ferguson's could have been used to halve rail fares for 3 months, not 3 weeks, and cap bus fares. The £1 billion on delayed discharge could have been used to give our care workers the pay rise they deserve. while families right now are being forced to account for every single penny of their spending, why does this First Minister think it is acceptable for them to pay the cost of £3.2 billion and rising of SNP failure?
First Minister, there are some really serious issues in there, and I hope, if not during this session, then after this session, Anna Sarwar will clarify at least, well, 2 points actually. But firstly, this one, because this is actually a serious constitutional question. He has twice now referenced the Rangers prosecution and the cost of settling that. But if he thinks that is something that I could have influenced, then is he saying that ministers should have been involved in or influencing the independent prosecution decisions or intervened in any way in that? And if he is going to somehow suggest, as he has, that those costs are waste on the part of the SNP, then he really has to answer. He really has to answer that fundamental question. Does he think I should have interfered in the prosecution decisions of the Crown Office? The second point, going back to the £146 million in relation to the hospital, is he saying that £80 million on essential preparation work shouldn't have been done for those hospitals? Because that is the logical conclusion of what he's saying. So the spin and the sound bites might sound good when Anna Sarwar is rehearsing these questions, but I think he should pay a bit more attention to the detail.
First Minister, if I may, there is a lot of background contribution going on in the Chamber at the moment, and I'd be grateful if it could cease and we could hear the First Minister. Thank you.
And to come on to what I think is the important part of the question, which is the cost of living crisis, Anna Sarwar has referenced rising petrol costs and rising energy costs. Can I remind Anna Sarwar that power over energy and the cost of petrol are still reserved to Westminster, and if he wants to change that, then he should argue for those powers to come here. And in terms of the wider cost of living, we've increased the benefits that this government is responsible for. We've doubled the child payment, and if we are to be able to do more, then he needs to support us in calling for greater welfare powers to come to this Parliament as well.
We will now move to supplementary questions, and I call Paul McKinnon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the cost of living soars and thousands of families across the country are already feeling the crush of grossly inflated energy bills, can the First Minister give an update on the number of families benefiting now from free childcare and how much money this will save them at such a critical time?
First Minister.
Over 111,000 children were accessing funded early learning and childcare in January of this year. 87% of these children are taking up the full entitlement, and families who do take up the full entitlement can save up to £4,900 each year for each child. And this is the most generous early learning and childcare offer anywhere in the UK. And of course, it will also deliver better social and educational outcomes for Scotland's children.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, there is an estimated 132,000 people suffering from long COVID in Scotland, with 59,000 of those experiencing symptoms for more than a year. This is a ticking time bomb, yet I think the SNP government is merely sticking its head in the sand, having dropped their debate on long COVID from the schedule this afternoon, preventing this Parliament an opportunity to discuss this. So can I ask the First Minister, when are we going to see specialist long COVID clinics in Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, we're currently implementing the commitments in the long COVID approach paper. That is all about improving care and support for people with long COVID in Scotland. Long COVID clinics are one model that health boards can consider, but we've always recognised, and I think rightly so, that no one single approach is going to fit all areas and circumstances. So health boards have to look at a range of approaches. In terms of the debate, of course, we have made clear and given a commitment that we will have a debate in the next few weeks. At that time, we will provide a full update on progress. And the intention is that we can provide Parliament at that time with a detailed update of the outcome of the planning process currently being undertaken with NHS boards to determine the first allocations of the Long COVID Support Fund, which of course is what MSPs have been calling for.
Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The anti-abortion lobby now sees Scotland as an easy target, with campaigners following the Texas playbook. Last September, I raised concerns with the First Minister and the urgent need for protest-free buffer zones at abortion services. Does she regret that swift action has not been taken? And can she confirm when telemedicine for early abortion will be made permanent, as Scotland is now trailing behind England and Wales on this important healthcare matter?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I say, on behalf of the Scottish Government, but also as First Minister, indeed personally, that we are committed to ensuring that all women are able to access timely abortions without judgment. I condemn, and I will do so in the strongest possible terms, any attempts to intimidate women as they choose to access abortion services. People, of course, have a right to protest against abortion, but they should do that outside Parliament, where the laws are made. They should not do that outside a hospital where women are undergoing abortions and, of course, experiencing, often as they do so, extreme distress. The Buffer Zones Working Group has been meeting. That is looking at ways to prevent any patients feeling harassed or intimidated when accessing healthcare. There are complex legal issues involved here, and there is no way of avoiding saying that. We must make sure that what we do, the approach we choose, is consistent with the law. I know the Minister is committed to seeing if that work can be accelerated. I think she may have said as much to Parliament earlier today. So we will keep Parliament updated on this work. But I would say again to those who take a different view on abortion to mine and to the view of many people in this chamber, by all means protest. You have a democratic right to do that. But come and protest at Parliament. Do not intimidate women seeking access to abortion at hospitals.
Mark Bristol.
The proposed closure of 19 Bank of Scotland branches will mark the loss of the last bank in town in Dunblane and many other communities. And as a result, vulnerable people in Dunblane without access to digital banking would need to make a 12-mile round trip to the nearest branch. Does the First Minister agree that this move is clearly out of step with our ambition to build 20-minute neighbourhoods, regenerate our high streets and connect communities to lifeline services?
First Minister.
Yes, I do share those concerns and I share those sentiments. I think we all understand that the way people access banking services has changed and changed quite fundamentally in some respects. And of course, banks have to respond to that and make sure the services they provide are reflective of that. But physical presence of banks and, of course, other facilities can be very important in sustaining access, but in sustaining the life of local communities. And it's really important that banks try to find the right balance. I have personally, and the Government generally, has communicated these views to the banking sector and will continue to do so.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Communities like Erith in Falkirk District are being left behind by the SNP Government's funding cuts to flood prevention. Ask the people of Erith. They're caught up in a game of piggy in the middle between SEPA and Falkirk Council, engaged in the worst kind of buck passing. How can people in villages like Erith have confidence in Nicola Sturgeon to deliver flood prevention schemes, given her record's woeful track record of cuts to local schemes?
First Minister.
We've provided significant and sustained funding for local flood prevention schemes. Of course, the decisions on individual schemes and the ranking of schemes are matters for local authorities. I'm more than happy to come back to the member with any more detail I am able to provide on the Earth scheme, but it's right that local authorities consult with SEPA but also with local communities in taking forward these schemes, and it's right that the Scottish Government continues to provide funding where appropriate.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Homeless Project Scotland in Glasgow has today said that they see high numbers of families attending their soup kitchen. Shelter told the Social Security Committee this morning that by the end of today and every day, the equivalent of a whole classroom full of children will be homeless. What more will the Government do to support the project in Glasgow, including to help it find a building to bring people together in rather than have to do it outside? And what will you do to pick up pace on building new homes in Glasgow?
First Minister.
Firstly, I'm happy to engage with the Homeless Project to see if there is more we can do as Government to try to help them find a building. The work they do is extremely important. We all wish it wasn't necessary, but I want to pay tribute to them for that. Over and above that, the Scottish Government will continue to do all we can to help people with this cost of living, which is heaping misery upon people who, in many cases, were already living in poverty. The increase in benefits I've already referenced, the doubling of the child payment support for the Welfare Fund, all of these policies will continue. Glasgow City Council, working of course with its partners, has a very good record in terms of delivering affordable housing, and well, we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks, but I know for my part the current administration has plans to continue to build on that progress. But it's incumbent on all of us with any influence and power right now to do everything we can to help people suffering with the cost of living crisis. But of course, for us to do as much as we would want to do does necessitate having more powers over these crucial issues lying in the hands of this Parliament and not in the hands of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak at Westminster.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, echo the good wishes expressed by the Chamber to Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of her 96th birthday, to ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet?
First Minister. Tuesday. Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for that reply. In January, the Scottish Government announced it had sold the lion's share of Scotland's seabed for £700 million. On it will be built huge wind farms. What ministers didn't tell Parliament that day was that the Scottish Government and Crown Estate Scotland explicitly stopped companies paying a vast amount more. There was a cap on bids of £100,000 per square kilometre. That's despite a sale in England and Wales, where there isn't a cap, achieving 4 times that in initial deposits alone. We know wind farm jobs are going overseas. It happened again in Murray last week. So the First Minister can't tell Parliament this is about employment. Scotland's seabed can only be sold once. The sale price matters because it is cash that flows straight to the Scottish Government's budget for schools and hospitals. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has sold these national assets on the cheap. They have thrown away a fortune. So can I ask the First Minister, when the auction south of the border netted 4 times more, why was she still determined to limit how much companies in Scotland should pay?
First Minister.
Firstly, the process used by Crown Estates in making these decisions was fully transparent, right and properly so. Secondly, I think we have to be careful in making these comparisons between the Scottish auction round and similar rounds elsewhere. There are differences in terms of the complexity of these projects in Scotland, partly to do with the depth of the water that these projects are taking place in. The other point I would make is that while Alex Cole-Hamilton's points about the £700 million are correct, that is not the only income from these projects. There will be annual rental costs as well. And of course, if we do this correctly, which we are determined to do, then there is going to be very, very significant economic benefit. And my final point would be to remind the Chamber of the vast potential of this. We went into this auction round with a planning assumption of 10 gigawatts of offshore wind power. We've come out of that auction round with potentially 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power. This is a massive, massive opportunity for Scotland, and one that all of us should be extremely positive about.
Question number 4, Jenny Minto.
Officer, to ask the First Minister what assurances the Scottish Government has had from the UK Government that the reported privatisation of Channel 4 will not negatively impact on the development of the creative sector across Scotland and the growth of new Scottish talent.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government strongly opposes the privatisation of Channel 4. In its present form, Channel 4 makes a significant contribution to the creative sector in Scotland, investing more than £200 million in Scottish-based production since 2007 and, of course, opening a creative hub in Glasgow in 2019. Since the announcement of privatisation plans by the UK Government on Twitter, no further information has been forthcoming from the UK Government. As soon as they do provide clarity, we will seek assurances about how they will ensure there is no negative impact on the creative sector in Scotland.
Jenny Minto.
Thank you for that answer. Does the First Minister share my concern that Channel 4 is currently under threat from a Tory government that appears to be doing all it can to undermine the principles of public service broadcasting for its own narrow political interest?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I think that is absolutely what is happening. These proposals, I think, represent cultural vandalism, but they do also represent an attempt on the part of the UK Government to undermine public service broadcasting. I can't see any reason whatsoever why Channel 4 should be privatised, and especially not at the very time it has shown resilience in weathering the pandemic and strengthened its content spend and investment in Scotland. The current model is a good one, is a successful one, and it's one that upholds the principles of public service broadcasting, and I think we should all get behind it and seek to see off these misguided Conservative proposals.
Question number 5, Liz Smith.
To ask the First Minister whether she can provide an update on the Scottish Government strategy to include libraries in the policy to address the attainment gap.
First Minister.
Libraries deliver a range of benefits, providing vital access to learning materials and resources, helping improve literacy and, of course, tackling the attainment gap. While local libraries are the responsibility of local government, the Scottish Government is committed to directly supporting libraries. As part of our programme for government, we launched a £1.25 million public library COVID relief fund, supporting 30 projects across Scotland to remain open and tackle the attainment gap, and that is over and above the money invested since 2017 through the School Library Improvement Fund and the continued annual Public Libraries Improvement Fund, which supports new projects in libraries. And as part of the £1 billion Scottish Attainment Challenge, the Framework for Recovery and Accelerating Progress encourages collaboration across local authority services, including education and local libraries.
Liz Smith.
The First Minister made great store by the National Strategy for School Libraries, which was launched in 2018, as she just said. But both the Scottish Library Information Council and SPICE tell me the advisory group met on 4 occasions in 2018, but there are no records of any recent meetings, no updates on progress made, particularly in terms of how effective the school library fund is being spent, and that a large number of primary schools remain without a library, or just as importantly, without a librarian. First Minister, this strategy was supposed to be a key component in the schools when it comes to addressing the attainment gap, but we know that between 2018 and 2021, the Curriculum for Excellence achievement levels in P1 to P7 literacy actually declined. Why has there been no formal parliamentary update on this strategy, and why are primary school literacy levels going backwards, not forwards?
First Minister. I think we are seeing improvements in attainment in Scotland's school. All of us understand the impact of COVID after the past couple of years, and that makes it all the more important that we focus on initiatives to improve attainment. I will write to the member, or ask the Education Minister to write to the member with more details on the work around school libraries, but I did in my answer talk about the investment we are making through the School Library Improvement Fund, which I think demonstrates the commitment of this government to supporting libraries in schools and to supporting local community libraries as well.
Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's absolutely right to highlight the importance of libraries to closing the huge attainment gap we have in Scotland. What does the First Minister have to say to the young people of Kirkton in Dundee, an area of deep deprivation with among the lowest attainment in Scotland, for whom the SNP government is cutting 79% of attainment funding, and for whom the SNP Council is closing the library?
First Minister.
Of course, the decisions we have taken in terms of the attainment funding are in recognition of the fact that we see deprivation in all parts of the country, and those changes to the allocation of the attainment fund were, of course, fully supported by COSLA, including the member's own colleagues on COSLA. And in terms of libraries, we continue, as I've said in my earlier answers, to support school libraries through the School Library Improvement Fund, and we will continue to do that.
Question number 6, Mercedes Villalba.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to bring down the cost to tenants of private rent in the coming year.
First Minister.
We're all aware of the significant pressures facing private renters, which is why our commitment to introduce rent controls is so important. That means, of course, doing detailed work to ensure that we implement an effective system of rent controls that is right for Scotland, robust against challenge, and one that will stand the test of time. Our housing bill will begin that process and also strengthen existing rights by ensuring anyone who believes that their rent increase is unfair can apply for adjudication without fear of their rent being put up. We're also providing immediate financial support for people who might be struggling. This includes doubling the Scottish Child Payment, as I've already referenced, from the start of this month, and investing up to £86 million this year in discretionary housing payments.
Mercedes Villalba.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Well, the Scottish Government's commitment to introduce rent controls is, of course, welcome. Rents are rising right now, so tenants can't afford to wait 3 or more years for action. The First Minister has rightly called for more action from the UK Government to help tackle the cost of living crisis, but this Parliament has powers to address one of the biggest pressures facing people in Scotland right now, which is rising rent costs. Some councils have already taken the positive step of introducing rent freezes for social tenants. So will the First Minister commit today to exploring the implementation of an emergency rent freeze to support all renters in Scotland?
First Minister.
As a matter of good faith, I will undertake to explore any suggestion that is made in the Chamber. We all want to do everything we can to help. I think the member will understand that to legislate, particularly on a complex matter like this, does take time. I think that was recognised by her colleague in the debate before Christmas, Mark Griffin, when he said that we certainly do not expect legislation to come into force in year 2 of this parliamentary session, but we look for details of the framework for the rules. So we will continue to look at how we can, if it is possible, accelerate progress here, but in the meantime take further action. We have already strengthened tenants' rights in recent years, and of course it is not the case that we are not providing help in the meantime. We have the £10 million tenant grant fund focused on helping private and social tenants who are struggling financially, and we are providing £86 million in housing support this year, and we provided £39 million of additional funding to avoid evictions as a result of the pandemic, and we will continue to make support available, but also continue to look closely at any suggestions for further action that might be made.
Thank you. We'll now return to general and constituency supplementary questions, and I call CoCab Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very proud of the record of Glasgow and Glasgow Kelvin in particular of supporting asylum seekers. Could I ask the First Minister what her reaction is to send asylum seekers arriving in the UK to a detention facility in Rwanda for processing?
First Minister.
I think this decision is utterly abhorrent, morally and ethically abhorrent. It's a total abdication of the UK's moral and international responsibilities to asylum seekers and refugees, and it will also make it more challenging and prolonged for people to seek safety from war and persecution. I think in this decision the UK Government is ignoring the welfare of extremely vulnerable people, and for all of these reasons this policy has rightly been condemned by many. When you hear Theresa May stand up in the House of Commons, and remember Theresa May was the Home Secretary who sent go-home vans around Glasgow, describe this policy as morally, ethically and practically wrong, then I think all of us have to realise how far from any moral course the UK Government is going on this issue.
First Minister, a recent review by Sir Peter Hendy for the UK Government has found that the A75 is the road most in need of an upgrade anywhere in the country. Will you admit that the failure to upgrade this dangerous road, often referred to as a goat track, represents a broken promise by the SNP to the people of the South West of Scotland and the haulage and ferry companies that depend on the route to move goods to and from Northern Ireland?
First Minister.
No, I don't accept that. The STPR2, of course, recommends that safety, resilience and reliability improvements are made on the A75 corridor to support access to Stranraer and to the ports at Cairnryan, and we will continue to take decisions that do indeed support that access, which all of us accept and agree is extremely important.
Natalie Dawn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given the rising cost of living, can I ask the First Minister if she welcomes the announcement yesterday that the newly publicly owned ScotRail will be slashing off-peak ticket prices in half for the month of May?
First Minister.
Yes, I absolutely welcome this half-price fare offer that, of course, newly publicly owned ScotRail announced yesterday. This was originally postponed due to Omicron, but people will now be able to book discounted tickets between the 9th and 15th of May for outward travel between the 9th and the 31st of May, with return travel to be completed by the 30th of June. The ScotRail's Kids for a Quid discount will also be able to be used in conjunction with this offer, which means that up to 4 children can travel for £1 return each, with each adult. We want people to return to travelling by rail, but we know we need to make it affordable to be a truly attractive alternative to using the car. And public ownership of ScotRail means delivering a service which listens and responds to passenger need, and we will continue to develop further initiatives that make rail a better choice as we work towards our ambitious net zero targets.
Graham Simpson.
Thank you. The Auditor-General has said today that an independent audit was unable to conclude that governance at South Lanarkshire College in East Kilbride was satisfactory over the last year. There have been serious issues at this college. Whistleblowers have made a number of allegations with reported claims of fraud, theft and general malfeasance. The Principal, Aileen McKechnie, ordered an audit report which the college is refusing to publish. She and the interim clerk to the board were then suspended. I suspect she was ruffling feathers. The college has now published an action plan that says procedures should be changed in areas such as procurement, preventing bribery and carrying out supplier due diligence. A light needs to be shone on what has been happening at this college. So will the First Minister order an investigation and commit to making its findings public?
First Minister.
I have some sympathy with the sentiments of that question. I know there are significant issues that have been raised. Colleges, of course, are self-governing institutions, but the Scottish Funding Council has an important role, and if the Scottish Funding Council considers it appropriate for there to be further inquiry or investigation, then of course it is able to do so. I'm happy to consider whether there is any further action or procedure that the Scottish Government can initiate, and I will come back to the member in writing if I conclude that that is the case.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. The Parole Board have issued warning letters to 25 life sentence prisoners accused of breaching their licence conditions. Does the First Minister seriously think murderers and rapists will care about a warning letter, or will she back our plans to recall lifers who breach parole and block their future early release?
First Minister.
I think it is right that we have a robust system of parole. If on any occasion it is concluded that that system needs reform, that should happen. But as we have covered in exchanges in this Parliament before, it is right that people who commit heinous crimes are properly punished for that, for the sake of punishment, but also to keep the public safe, but that we also have a justice system that supports rehabilitation as well, because that is in the wider public interest, and we will continue to ensure that the parole system is fit for purpose.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Katy Clark, and there will be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so before the debate begins.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.